The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of Crestwood Academy, painting golden lines across the polished marble floors. The school was quiet, except for the faint echo of footsteps and the soft hum of the janitor's cart moving down the long hallway. Mr. Samuel Hayes had been working there for almost 3 years. Every morning he arrived before sunrise, wearing the same dark blue uniform and carrying his old thermos filled with coffee. He didn't talk much, but he greeted everyone with a kind smile, even when they barely noticed him. To most of the students, he was invisible, just the man who cleaned up after them, mopped their spills and emptied their trash cans. But to Samuel, this school wasn't just a workplace. It was a world filled with sounds, laughter, chatter, and most of all, music. He especially loved the music room at the far end of the hall. It had tall windows, a shiny grand piano, and shelves filled with instruments. Every time he passed by, he slowed his steps. Sometimes, if the door was slightly open, he would glance inside and watch the students play. The melodies always stirred something deep inside him, something he had buried long ago. Samuel had once known the piano more closely than anyone here could imagine. But that was another life, one he rarely thought about anymore. Most students didn't know his story. They only saw a quiet old man who swept floors. Some of them joked about him, calling him Mop Man or Grandpa Hayes. Others ignored him altogether. But Samuel never complained. He just smiled, kept his head down, and did his job. On this particular morning, the school was buzzing with excitement. The annual music showcase was coming up, and everyone was preparing for it. Posters filled the hallways, and the sound of piano practice floated through the air. Inside the music room, a young girl named Isabella Carter sat at the grand piano. She was one of the school's top students, talented, beautiful, and confident. Her father was a well-known businessman who donated generously to the school, and everyone knew it. Isabella liked attention. She always arrived in shiny cars, wore designer clothes, and made sure people noticed her. She played the piano well, but she played for praise, not passion. As Samuel walked by the music room, he heard her playing. The melody was loud, fast, and showy, and meant to impress. He paused outside the door, listening. His fingers twitched slightly, as if remembering something. Inside, Isabella frowned at a wrong note and sighed loudly. "Ugh, this piano is so out of tune," she muttered, though it wasn't. She stood up and grabbed her phone. "I need a break." She walked out, leaving the piano open and the room empty. Samuel stood in the hallway, his heart beating a little faster. He looked around and no one was there. Slowly, he stepped into the music room. He approached the piano as if approaching an old friend. His hands were rough and calloused from years of cleaning, but when he ran his fingers over the smooth keys, a calm feeling washed over him. He hesitated for a moment. Then he pressed a single note. The sound was pure and deep. He pressed another, then another. Without realizing it, his hands began to move, forming a gentle melody, soft, emotional, full of longing. It was a piece he had composed long ago, back when his life had been very different. For a moment, the world outside disappeared. He forgot the mop, the uniform, the teasing. He was once again the man who had lived for music, who could make people cry or smile with a single note. But then a sharp voice cut through the air. "What do you think you're doing?" Samuel froze. Isabella stood at the doorway, arms crossed, eyes wide with disbelief. Two of her friends stood behind her, smirking. I'm sorry, miss," Samuel said quietly, standing up quickly. "I didn't mean to what?" "Touch my piano?" Isabella interrupted, walking closer. "Do you even know how expensive this is? You could break it with your dirty hands." Her friends laughed, whispering behind her. One of them said, "Guess he thinks he's Mozart or something." Samuel's face turned red. He lowered his eyes and wiped his hands nervously on his uniform. "I'm truly sorry, miss. I'll leave right away." "Yeah, do that," Isabella said coldly. "And next time maybe stick to cleaning floors. Leave the piano to people who actually belong here." The words stung more than she could imagine, but Samuel said nothing. He simply nodded and quietly walked out of the room. The laughter followed him down the hallway, echoing like a cruel melody. That evening, when the school emptied and the sun dipped below the trees, Samuel was still there, finishing his work. The music room was dark now. He pushed his cart past it but didn't look inside. He knew better than to dream, yet as he passed by the window he couldn't help but pause once more. Through the reflection he saw himself, an old man with tired eyes. But behind that reflection, he imagined another version of himself, the one who used to sit on bright stages dressed in a black suit, with the spotlight on him and the crowd listening in awe. He shook his head gently. That life was gone. The piano belonged to another world now. The next day, the school was full of chatter. Isabella was telling everyone about how the janitor had tried to play her piano. Some students laughed. Others just shrugged. "Can you believe that?" she said to her friends during lunch. "He actually thought he could play." It was pathetic. Her friends nodded, enjoying the drama. None of them noticed the quiet figure mopping the far end of the hallway. Samuel heard every word, but he kept his eyes on his work. The floor shone brightly under his mop, though his heart felt heavy. Later that afternoon, as he took a short break in the supply room, the music teacher, Mrs. Parker, stopped by. She was one of the few people who treated him kindly. "Samuel," she said with a gentle smile, "you've been working hard as always." "Thank you," he smiled faintly. "Just doing my part, ma'am." She hesitated, then asked softly, "I heard something strange today. Is it true you played the piano yesterday?" Samuel looked down. "I touched it for a moment. I shouldn't have. I'm sorry if it caused trouble." Mrs. Parker smiled kindly. "No trouble at all. In fact, a few teachers said they heard beautiful music coming from the room." "Was that you?" He didn't answer right away. Then he said quietly, "Just an old habit. Nothing more." Her eyes softened. "Well, if that's true, it's a gift you shouldn't hide." He gave a small, tired smile, then went back to his work. When Mrs. Parker left, Samuel sat alone for a while. Her words lingered in his mind. A gift you shouldn't hide, but he knew how the world worked. People like Isabella, people with money, influence, and pride, they were the ones who got to shine. People like him were meant to stay in the background, sweeping the floor unseen. Still, that night, when he returned home to his small apartment, he sat down at the tiny keyboard he had kept hidden under a cloth. It was old, missing a few keys, but it still worked. He played softly the same melody he had played in the school. The music filled the room, simple and pure. For those few minutes, he was free again. He didn't know that soon. Everything would change when the same girl who had mocked him would one day look at him in awe. But for now, he was just a janitor with a secret, a man whose heart still spoke through the piano, even when the world no longer listened. And as he closed his eyes, lost in the music, the sound of the notes floated through the night, whispering of something greater waiting just ahead. The next morning, Crestwood Academy was alive with noise. Students were rushing through the halls, talking about the upcoming music showcase. It was the biggest event of the year. Parents, teachers, and even some local reporters would be there. Everyone wanted to look their best and sound their best. Isabella Carter, as usual, was at the center of attention. She sat at her usual spot in the cafeteria, surrounded by friends. Her phone was on the table, and she was showing a video of her piano practice from the day before. "See that part?" she said proudly, pointing at the screen. "That's where I'll really impress the judges. No one can play that section like I do." Her friends nodded and smiled, but one of them, a girl with curly hair, hesitated. "Didn't you say the janitor touched your piano yesterday?" Isabella laughed loudly, making sure everyone nearby could hear. "Oh yes, you won't believe it. He actually sat down and started playing like he belonged there. It was ridiculous." The others joined in her laughter. "Did he even know what he was doing?" one of them asked. "I doubt it," Isabella said, flipping her hair. "He's just a janitor. I told him to stay away from my piano. I mean, can you imagine? Those dirty hands on a Steinway?" They all burst into laughter again while Samuel Hayes walked quietly past their table, pushing his cleaning cart. He didn't look at them, but he heard every word. The sound of their laughter followed him, like an echo that wouldn't fade. He had been assigned to clean the music room again that morning. When he entered, sunlight poured through the tall windows and the piano gleamed as if it had been waiting for him. He paused for a second, then gently dusted the lid, careful not to touch the keys. He could still feel the warmth of yesterday's melody in his fingers, but he didn't dare play again. The memory of Isabella's angry voice still stung in his chest. He finished cleaning quickly and moved on. Later that day, Isabella returned for practice. She sat at the piano, but something was off. Her fingers stumbled over the notes, her timing felt wrong, and no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't focus. The sound of the janitor's quiet melody from the day before kept echoing in her mind. She couldn't understand why. It was strange, simple, soft, but somehow powerful. It made her feel something she couldn't explain. She shook her head and pressed the keys harder, trying to drown out the memory. Mrs. Parker, the music teacher, entered the room with her clipboard. "Isabella," she said kindly, "remember, music is not about speed or perfection. It's about emotion." Isabella nodded, though she barely listened. She wanted to be perfect. She wanted people to be amazed by her, to clap the loudest for her performance. That was what mattered. When her father came to pick her up that evening, she climbed into the back seat of his car. "How was practice?" he asked, glancing at her through the mirror. "It was fine," she said. "But I'm still not satisfied with the piano. It doesn't sound right." Her father smiled slightly. "Maybe you're just nervous. Remember, perfection comes from confidence." She nodded but said nothing. That night, Samuel walked home under the streetlights, carrying his small lunchbox. The air was cool and the city felt quiet. He passed a music store and stopped for a moment, staring through the window at the instruments inside. A young man was playing a slow tune on a display piano, and Samuel couldn't help but smile. He remembered a time when he used to be like that, confident, passionate, free. But that was before the accident, before he lost everything that mattered. He sighed and continued walking. The next day, the principal called a quick staff meeting about the upcoming showcase. Samuel was there to help set up chairs and clean the auditorium. Everyone was talking about decorations, sound checks, and seating arrangements. As he worked, he noticed Isabella enter with her friends. She walked like someone who owned the place, chin high, shoulders back. But behind her proud look, there was a hint of frustration. "Make sure the piano's tuned before the performance," she told one of the teachers. "I can't play if it's not perfect." "It's already been checked," the teacher said patiently. "It's in great condition." Still, Isabella looked doubtful. "We'll see," she muttered. When she left, Samuel stayed behind, adjusting the seats and polishing the piano legs. He could see his reflection on the shiny black surface. For a moment he smiled at it, not out of pride but out of nostalgia. Mrs. Parker walked in again. "Samuel, thank you for all your help," she said warmly. "We couldn't prepare all this without you." "It's no trouble," he said softly. She hesitated for a second, then added, "You know, you really do have a gift. I heard a bit of that tune the other day. It was beautiful." Samuel's eyes widened slightly. "You heard that?" She nodded. "Yes, you should play at the showcase one day. People would love it," he chuckled quietly. "I don't think anyone wants to see an old janitor on stage, ma'am." She smiled sadly. Sometimes the people we least expect are the ones with the most to share. After she left, he stood there for a long moment, thinking about her words. He knew he would never be on that stage again, but maybe it was enough to still have music in his heart. The following morning, a problem arose. The school's piano tuner had fallen sick and couldn't come before the showcase. Panic spread among the teachers. The principal was worried. The piano had to be perfect for the performances. Mrs. Parker mentioned that Samuel used to play and might understand how to handle a basic tuning. At first, the principal hesitated, unsure if it was appropriate. But time was running out and there was no other choice. "Samuel," the principal said finally, "could you check the piano, just to make sure it sounds right?" Samuel blinked in surprise. "Me? I suppose I can try." Word spread quickly among the students. When Isabella heard that the janitor was going to fix the piano, she nearly dropped her water bottle. "You've got to be kidding," she said, laughing. "They're letting him touch it again?" Her friends giggled. "Maybe he'll try to play again." "I hope not," Isabella said. "This is ridiculous. What if he breaks it?" But no one else volunteered, and the principal's decision was final. That afternoon, Samuel was called to the stage. The entire music class, including Isabella, was there for rehearsal. He walked slowly toward the piano, feeling dozens of eyes on him. Some students whispered, others smirked. He ignored them all. He opened the lid carefully and began checking the strings and pedals. His movements were calm, confident, the hands of someone who knew exactly what he was doing. He pressed a few keys, adjusted a peg, then played a soft chord. The sound filled the hall, clear and balanced. Everyone went silent. He played another chord, then let his fingers drift naturally across the keys. A melody flowed out, and not loud or flashy, but warm and full of emotion. It felt like sunlight after rain, like something that could heal. For a few seconds, no one moved. Isabella's eyes widened. The same man she had mocked days ago was now playing with more skill and soul than she had ever heard. When he stopped, the sound of silence filled the room. Then Mrs. Parker began to clap softly. "Beautiful," she whispered. "Just beautiful." The principal smiled, clearly impressed. "I think the piano sounds perfect now." Samuel stood, slightly embarrassed. "Just doing my job, sir," he said quietly and began to step away. But before he could leave, Isabella spoke, her voice soft but shaken. Where did you learn to play like that?" Samuel paused, then looked at her kindly. "A long time ago," he said. "Before I came here." She wanted to ask more, but he simply nodded and walked away, leaving her staring after him, her mind spinning. For the first time, Isabella wasn't thinking about money or status or perfection. She was thinking about the music, about how someone who had nothing could play like he had everything. That night she couldn't sleep. She kept hearing that melody in her head. It made her heart feel heavy and warm at the same time. She realized for the first time in her life that there was something about music she didn't understand, something deeper than applause. And in that quiet moment, she felt a small spark of humility, a new kind of respect for the man she had laughed at. The morning of the showcase arrived, and the entire school buzzed with excitement. The stage in the main hall had been decorated with flowers and shining lights. Teachers rushed around with clipboards, checking every detail, while students practiced in every corner. Violins, flutes, guitars, and of course the grand piano. Samuel arrived early, as always. He wore his cleanest uniform and polished his shoes the night before. He knew it was a big day for the students, and he wanted everything to look perfect. He spent the first few hours sweeping the hallways, wiping chairs, and making sure the floor sparkled. Every now and then he looked at the stage. The piano sat in the center, glowing under the lights. It looked like it belonged in a dream. He smiled quietly, remembering how it had once felt to play on such a stage. In the dressing room, Isabella was getting ready. She wore a beautiful light blue dress and a sparkling hair clip. Her father had promised to be there, sitting in the front row. She wanted everything to be perfect. She wanted to impress him, to make him proud. But deep down she felt uneasy. For 2 nights she hadn't been able to stop thinking about the janitor's playing. The sound of his music kept coming back to her, haunting her in a way she couldn't explain. It wasn't just skill, it was emotion. It was real, and it made her question everything she thought she knew about music. Still, she brushed the thought aside. She had practiced her piece 100 times. She had talent, confidence, and an audience waiting for her. That was all that mattered. Before the performance started, Mrs. Parker gathered all the performers in the backstage area. "Remember," she said kindly, "this is not just about showing what you can do. It's about sharing a piece of your heart. Play because you love it." Her words made Isabella glance toward the corner where Samuel was adjusting the curtain. He looked calm as always, sweeping quietly, making sure everything was in order. For a moment, their eyes met. He smiled politely. She quickly looked away, feeling a strange guilt rise in her chest. The showcase began with a group performance by the school choir. The audience clapped enthusiastically. Then came a violin solo, a flute duet, and a few guitar performances. Every time someone finished, the crowd cheered. Backstage, Isabella was next in line. Her heart beat faster with each passing second. She peeked through the curtain and saw her father in the front row, sitting beside the principal and Mrs. Parker. He waved and smiled proudly. When the student before her finished, Isabella took a deep breath. But just as she was about to step forward, the stagehand whispered urgently to the teachers. "The piano's gone out of tune," he said. "It sounds terrible. The last performer's piece messed it up somehow." Mrs. Parker frowned. "The tuner isn't here yet, is he?" "No," the man said nervously. "He called in sick." The principal's expression tightened. "We can't delay the show. We need someone who can fix it right now." There was a moment of silence. Then Mrs. Parker looked toward the corner, at Samuel, who was quietly folding a cloth near the curtain. "Maybe he can help," she said. The principal looked uncertain. "Are you sure?"
"He played it beautifully the other day," she said softly.
"If anyone knows how to handle that piano, it's him." Isabella turned sharply. "Wait, you want him to fix my piano? During my performance?" Mrs. Parker gave her a calm look. He's the only one who can help right now. Let's give him a chance. Isabella opened her mouth to protest, but before she could, Samuel stepped forward quietly. If you'll allow me, sir, I can check it. The principal nodded. Please do, Mr. Hayes, we're out of options. Samuel walked toward the stage slowly, the sound of his footsteps echoing through the hall. The audience grew quiet, watching curiously. Some students in the front whispered to each other, wondering what the janitor was doing there. He sat on the piano bench, opened the lid, and began to test the keys one by one. His touch was gentle, almost loving. He adjusted the strings with calm precision, humming softly under his breath. After a few minutes, he pressed a few chords, and something magical happened. The sound that filled the hall was pure, smooth, and full of life. But then, instead of stopping, his hands began to move on their own. He started to play. The melody rose softly at first like a whisper, then grew deeper and more powerful. It was full of emotion, joy, pain, hope, and something that words could never describe. The entire hall fell silent. Every note seemed to reach into people's hearts and pull at something they didn't even know was there. Isabella stood frozen behind the curtain, staring. She had never heard anything like it. It wasn't just music, it was a story, one that felt personal, one that felt alive. Even her father, who rarely showed emotion, leaned forward in his seat, completely captivated. When Samuel finally stopped, the hall remained silent for a few seconds. Then suddenly everyone began to clap, loud, sincere applause that filled the room. He stood up awkwardly, embarrassed, and gave a small bow. The piano is ready now, he said softly, then turned to leave the stage. But as he walked past, Mrs. Parker whispered, "That was beautiful, Samuel." He nodded humbly and went back behind the curtain. Isabella stood there, still stunned. When it was her turn to perform, she walked slowly toward the stage. For the first time, her hands trembled slightly above the keys. She could still feel the echo of his music in the air. She began to play her piece, the same fast, dramatic tune she had practiced for weeks. The notes were perfect, the timing sharp, but something was missing. The audience listened politely, but the warmth from before was gone. She knew it too. She could feel it with every note she played. Her fingers moved, but her heart wasn't there. She realized that she had been so focused on perfection that she had forgotten what music was supposed to mean. When she finished, the crowd clapped, but not with the same emotion they had shown moments ago. She smiled politely, stood up and bowed, but inside she felt empty. As she walked backstage, she saw Samuel standing quietly near the curtain, holding a folded cloth. She hesitated, then slowly approached him. "That song you played," she said softly. "What was it?" He looked at her, surprised by her tone. "Just something I wrote a long time ago," he said. "It was incredible," she admitted. "I've never heard anything like it." He smiled faintly. "Thank you, miss. Music can speak when words can't." She nodded, unable to find the right words. After a pause, she said, "I think I understand that now." For the rest of the evening, the audience kept talking about the man who played the piano. Some thought he was a guest performer. Others wondered if he had been a professional musician once. When the showcase ended, Isabella's father came backstage to congratulate her. "You did well," he said warmly, though his tone carried less enthusiasm than usual. "Thanks, Dad," she said quietly. But her eyes drifted to where Samuel was packing his things. Her father followed her gaze. "That man," he said, "he played beautifully." "Do you know who he is?" Isabella shook her head. "He's the janitor." Her father looked surprised. "The janitor?" She nodded slowly. "Yes, and I think he's more of a musician than I'll ever be." Her father smiled gently. "Then maybe you should learn from him." She looked down, thoughtful. That night, when everyone had gone home, Samuel stayed behind to finish cleaning. The hall was quiet now, the lights dimmed. He walked over to the piano one last time and ran his fingers softly across the keys. He smiled, not because of the applause, but because for the first time in years, he had shared his music again. It felt like a piece of his old life had returned, not through fame or glory, but through something much simpler: being heard. Outside, the sky was filled with stars. As he left the building, he felt lighter, as if the music had carried away a bit of the weight he had been holding for so long. And somewhere in the city, a young girl sat by her window, staring at the night sky, replaying his melody in her mind. a tune that would soon change both their lives forever. The morning after the music showcase, the school was filled with talk about one thing: the janitor's performance. Everyone had seen it, everyone had felt it. Some said it was the most beautiful thing they had ever heard inside that hall. Others couldn't believe that a man who cleaned floors could play like that. Samuel arrived as usual, carrying his mop and bucket, pretending not to hear the whispers. But this time they weren't cruel. They were filled with surprise and curiosity. Some students even smiled at him, something that had never happened before. "Good morning, Mr. Hayes," one student said shyly as she passed. He nodded kindly. Good morning. He wasn't used to attention and he didn't want it. He had lived quietly for years and he preferred it that way. The piano had always been his secret, his only way of keeping a piece of his past alive. But now, after what happened, that secret was out. When he reached the music room, he paused at the door. The piano sat there, shining in the morning light. He touched the edge softly and smiled. It felt different now, not just like an instrument, but like a bridge between who he used to be and who he had become. Just then, Isabella walked in. She stopped when she saw him, a little unsure of what to say. The memory of how she had spoken to him before filled her with shame. "Good morning," she said quietly. He looked up, surprised, then gave a small smile. "Good morning, miss?" For a few seconds there was silence. She looked down, twisting her fingers nervously. "I wanted to say, I'm sorry," she said finally, "for the way I treated you before. I was rude and I didn't understand." Samuel nodded slowly. "You don't have to apologize, miss. I understand how it looked." "No," she said quickly. "It's not about how it looked. I judged you without knowing anything about you. And then, when you played..." She paused, her voice softening. "I've never heard anything like it." He smiled gently. "Music speaks to everyone differently. I'm just glad it reached you." She hesitated. "Will you teach me?" He blinked, unsure if he'd heard her right. "Teach you?" "Yes," she said firmly. "Not how to play, I already know that part. But how to feel it. How to make it sound like you do." Samuel looked thoughtful for a moment. He hadn't taught anyone in years. The last person he'd ever tried to teach had been his daughter long ago. He swallowed the lump in his throat. "I don't know if I'm the right person to teach," he said quietly. "You are," Isabella said softly. "Please, I want to learn." After a long pause, he nodded. "All right then. If you're willing to listen, really listen, we'll start tomorrow morning." Her face brightened. "I will, I promise." The next day, Isabella came early, long before other students arrived. The music room was quiet except for the sound of Samuel gently dusting the piano keys. "You're early," he said with a smile. "Didn't want to waste any time," she said eagerly. Nodded toward the piano bench. "Sit down." She sat, her fingers hovering above the keys. He stood beside her, arms crossed gently. "Play something you know," he said. She began a fast, complicated tune, full of flourishes and power. It was impressive, but her notes were sharp, controlled, almost mechanical. When she finished, he said quietly, "Now close your eyes." She frowned slightly, but obeyed. "Play the same piece again," he said. "But this time, don't think about impressing anyone. Think about how the music makes you feel. Imagine it's just you and the sound. No audience, no teacher, no expectation. Just you." She took a deep breath and started again. This time her playing slowed down. Her hands moved gently and the notes came out warmer, softer. When she finished, she opened her eyes. Samuel nodded approvingly. "Better. Music isn't about perfection. It's about connection." She smiled faintly. "That felt different." "Good," he said simply. "Now remember that feeling." They continued like that every morning before classes. Samuel taught her not just how to play, but how to listen, to the silence between the notes, to the emotion behind each sound. Sometimes he told her stories about his past, though never in full. He mentioned that he used to perform when he was younger, that he had once played on big stages. But there was always something he left unsaid, a quiet sadness behind his words. Isabella never asked too many questions. She could see it was painful for him. One morning, as they practiced, Mrs. Parker walked in and smiled. "So it's true," she said warmly. "You're taking lessons from our star janitor." Isabella blushed. "He's a better teacher than anyone I've ever had." Samuel chuckled softly. "You're kind, miss," but Mrs. Parker wasn't surprised. I always knew there was something special about the way you touched that piano, Samuel, she said. You play like a man who's lived through every note. He didn't reply. He just gave a small, knowing smile. Word began to spread around the school. Students would peek through the door during their lessons, amazed to see Isabella learning from the janitor she once mocked. Some even started greeting him with respect. Things began to change. The same hallways that once echoed with laughter behind his back now filled with friendly smiles and nods. Still, Samuel stayed humble. He continued his work, mopping floors, cleaning classrooms. But there was a lightness in his step now. It felt good to share music again, to see someone truly listen. One afternoon, Isabella brought a piece she had written herself. I tried composing something, she said shyly. I wanted you to hear it, he nodded. Go on then. She started playing, her hands trembling slightly. The melody was soft and full of feeling. Not perfect, but honest. When she finished, she looked up nervously. Samuel was smiling. That's beautiful, he said quietly. You played with your heart. She beamed with pride. You taught me that, he nodded. Then I've done my job. But deep down he knew it wasn't just about teaching her. She had taught him something too. That even after all the years of silence, his music could still touch someone. That evening, as the sun set outside the tall windows, Isabella asked the question that had been on her mind for weeks. Why did you stop playing? She asked softly. He looked away, his eyes clouded. For a long moment he said nothing. Then he whispered, I had a family once. My wife and daughter loved music. My little girl used to sit beside me when I played. She wanted to be a pianist too. Isabella listened quietly, her heart sinking at the sadness in his voice. There was an accident, he continued, his voice barely above a whisper. They were both gone in one night. After that, I couldn't touch a piano for years. Every note reminded me of them. Her eyes filled with tears. I'm so sorry, she said softly. He smiled faintly. It's all right. Music hurt me once, but it also saved me. It gave me peace again. That's why I came here, to stay close to it, even if no one knew who I was. For a moment, the room was silent except for the soft ticking of the clock. Then Isabella said, You didn't just fix the piano that day. You fixed something in me too. Samuel looked at her kindly. Music does that. It heals what words cannot. From that day on, their lessons became more than just practice sessions. They became moments of understanding. Two people from different worlds brought together by the same language. Music. Weeks passed, and the bond between them grew. Isabella's playing improved, but more importantly, her heart changed. She became humbler, kinder, more thoughtful. The teachers noticed it. Even her father saw a difference. She no longer cared about applause or competition. She played for the love of it, just like Samuel did. One afternoon, as they finished another lesson, she turned to him and said, There's another showcase coming up. I want you to play with me in a duet. He looked surprised. Me? Yes, she said firmly. You and I together. He smiled softly, shaking his head. I'm not sure people want to see a janitor on stage. They'll see a musician, she said, her eyes shining. And they'll listen. He studied her face for a moment, then finally nodded. All right, miss. We'll play. As she left the room that day, he looked at the piano again, his eyes glistening. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like a man who had lost everything. He felt like a man who had found his music again. The weeks leading up to the showcase moved quickly. Every morning, Samuel and Isabella practiced together in the quiet music room before anyone else arrived. The air between them was always calm, filled with soft notes and quiet understanding. They had chosen a duet that Isabella had written herself, a song that began softly, like a whisper, and grew into something powerful and full of hope. It wasn't about showing skill or speed. It was about emotion, about two souls finding their way through pain and music. Samuel guided her gently as they practiced. Let the notes breathe, he said. Don't rush them. Every sound should mean something. She nodded, trying again. The sound filled the empty hall, slow, delicate, full of heart. You've come far, he said quietly when they finished. It's because of you, she replied. You helped me see what music really is. He smiled softly. No, miss. You already had it inside you. You just needed to listen. Every day they practiced, the connection between them grew stronger. They were no longer just a student and a janitor. They were two musicians learning from each other. But even as the showcase drew closer, Samuel felt a quiet nervousness inside him. It had been so long since he had played in front of an audience. The thought of walking onto that stage again with people staring made his hands tremble slightly. He tried to hide it, but Isabella noticed. "Are you nervous?" she asked one morning. He gave a small laugh. "A little. It's been years since I've played for anyone but myself." She smiled kindly. "You'll be amazing." "You always are." He looked at her and nodded. "We both will." The day of the showcase finally arrived. The school auditorium was decorated with lights and banners. The seats filled quickly with students, teachers, and parents. Even local journalists had come. Word had spread that something special was going to happen that evening. Backstage, Isabella paced nervously while Samuel stood quietly beside her, looking calm, though his heart was racing. "I can't believe we're really doing this," she said, half smiling. He nodded. "Believe it. You've worked for it." Just then, her father walked in. He had been away on business for weeks and had only recently heard about what had happened. He looked at Samuel, then at his daughter. "So this is the man who's been teaching you," he said, his tone unreadable. Samuel nodded respectfully. "Yes, sir. I'm just helping her find her sound." Her father studied him for a moment, then said quietly, "I saw the video, the one from the last showcase. You have real talent." Samuel smiled faintly. "Thank you." There was a pause, then Isabella's father said, "I was wrong about you. Thank you for helping my daughter." Samuel nodded again. "She did most of the work herself. I just showed her the way." The lights dimmed and it was time. Samuel and Isabella stepped onto the stage together. The crowd went silent. The sight of the school janitor walking to the piano beside one of the wealthiest students caused a stir. Whispers rippled through the audience, but Samuel didn't notice them. His eyes were fixed on the piano. The moment his fingers touched the keys, the noise around him faded away. They began to play. At first, the music was soft and slow, a quiet melody that felt like a memory. Then it grew fuller and richer as Isabella joined in. Their notes intertwined perfectly, blending sadness and hope, pain and beauty. It was as if they were telling a story. His story, her story, and how they had met in the middle through music. The audience was silent, completely drawn in. Even those who had once laughed at him sat frozen, unable to look away. When the final note faded, there was a long moment of silence. Then the entire hall erupted into applause. People stood clapping, cheering, shouting. Isabella's eyes filled with tears. Samuel smiled quietly, bowing his head. Mrs. Parker was the first to stand. "Bravo!" she shouted. "That was beautiful." Even Isabella's father stood, clapping proudly. After the performance, people rushed to the stage. Reporters asked questions. Students congratulated them. Teachers smiled warmly. But through it all, Samuel remained humble, quietly thanking those who spoke to him. Later that evening, when everyone had left and the lights were dimmed, Samuel stayed behind. He sat at the piano alone, his hands resting gently on the keys. Isabella walked in quietly. "You played beautifully," she said softly. He smiled. "So did you. You made that song come alive." She came closer. "You could play anywhere, you know. People would love to hear you." He chuckled softly. "Maybe, but I'm happy here. This piano, this school, it's enough for me." She hesitated. "You're not just a janitor, you know." He looked at her kindly. "I am. But that doesn't mean I can't be more than that, too." For a moment, she didn't speak. Then she smiled. "I'll never forget you," he nodded. "And I'll never forget this. You reminded me what music feels like." Weeks passed and things slowly returned to normal. Samuel kept working at the school, but everything felt different now. People greeted him by name. Students often stopped to talk to him or ask for piano tips. Even the principal invited him to play at school events. Isabella kept practicing, writing new music inspired by their time together. Sometimes she'd call Samuel into the music room to show him what she'd made. Each time he'd smile proudly and say, "That's beautiful, miss. Keep playing." One afternoon she found him sitting near the piano, polishing it carefully. "I have something for you," she said, handing him a small envelope. He opened it and found a letter. Inside was a music conservatory's invitation. They had seen a video of his performance and wanted him to come and give a guest talk about the power of music. Samuel looked up, stunned. "They want me?" She nodded excitedly. "Yes, they were so moved by your playing. You have to go." He smiled slowly, shaking his head in disbelief. "Life is full of surprises, isn't it?" She grinned. "The best kind." He went to the conservatory the next week. He walked into the large hall filled with students, some young, some older, all eager to hear him. He told them his story, not about pain, but about how music had carried him through it. He told them that music wasn't about fame or money, but about feeling, about connecting, about healing. When he finished, the entire hall stood to applaud. It wasn't just respect, it was gratitude. That night, as he walked home under the streetlights, Samuel felt a peace he hadn't known in years. He looked up at the sky and smiled, whispering softly, "Thank you." Back at the school, Isabella sat at the piano playing the melody they had shared.